wanted to do was run through a few things. One, just an overview of Mayfield and kind of how we think about the market. I'll also talk a little bit about how we work with global CIOs as a way to better understand kind of the trends, purchasing pattern, prioritization, and issues that corporate buyers have. And this corporate buyer network we call the CXO network is a large group of CIOs, CTOs, heads of corporate innovation, who we lean upon for insight around both prioritization, as I mentioned, but also to support our portfolio companies from a due diligence and product market fit exercise. And so I can talk a little bit about that, which is the whole PMF process. This network also provides for us some very clear objectives around working with early stage companies, the kind of way they want to work with early stage companies, the feedback, the process, and some best practices and suggestions there. So I'll share some of that as well. But again, please stop me with questions, and I'll do my best to answer them in a way that that is thoughtful, I guess. So I'm just killing some other slide decks here. Bear with me a sec. All right. So first of all, Mayfield, been around 50 years. We're early stage venture capital and have been involved in hundreds of companies, literally. And in the process of that, have sort of honed in on what we think is a focused way for Series A investing. And so unlike some firms maybe that invest across the spectrum, from seed to late stage, we believe that Series A is a primary sort of opportunity for us as an investor, and a primary skill set that we need to bring to the table. We talk about what we call people first investing, and the concept here is really supporting the entrepreneur, of course, to reach great success, but also it's a bit of a suggestion that the idea that the technology and the TAM, or the addressable market, are perhaps still works in progress, but the team, the people, are a real asset that we need to get our arms around, so to speak, and really understand kind of their capability, their drive, their bigger mission, and their ability to be self-aware as to the problems and issues that might present as they build this large opportunity. Self-awareness is a critical skill set that we look for, which is, ability to take input both from customers and market, from investors, from competitors broadly, as a way to refine their strategy and actually to get to that excellent product market fit and excellent execution of a company. Sometimes that self-awareness is a skill set that has that leader or that entrepreneur being driven by outside voices who send them in one or another direction, but rather what we're looking for is that self-awareness, ability to analyze input and come back with your own interpretation and your own strategy against that, versus just being directed by input. These are the key areas that we're investing in: infrastructure, SaaS, consumer, and engineering, biology, or health. We're managing about $2.5 billion. We raised a new fund this past March. We're typically writing a $10 or so million check. We're typically the first investor outside of or beyond the seed or angel stage of a company. These are the areas from an infrastructure standpoint that we're investing in. So semiconductor, middleware, infrastructure, data, apps, and security. We're seeing a fair amount of harvesting going on as of late. This we think is a trend that will continue for the next few years or more. Largely, we've watched technology demand from the consumer side to push for some of the larger, let's say older technology companies to move to innovate through acquisition, because their own roadmaps aren't moving quite fast enough in some cases. And so this harvesting thesis we think will continue. These are the major investment themes that we as an investor are focused on, and I can get into all sorts of detail on these, but these are sort of maybe consistent with how you're thinking as well. And I, of course, can get into these, but these represent what we consider to be macro multi-trillion-dollar opportunities that are ripe for tangible disruption, both from criteria and demand from the market, gaps in the technology that's currently available, and long-term momentum from a market transition or market demand standpoint that's driving change. One of the, just sidebar here, one of the questions people often ask is what's going on in the venture world and how are things what's the status of things? Are things going well, or did this last year have impact on things? And of course, COVID did have an impact. At the beginning in March, there were a number of pretty negative interpretations that we would actually go into a probable long-term recession, maybe 18 months or more. And most venture firms sort of sat down with their startups and said, okay, be prepared for some dark clouds for the foreseeable future, cut costs, change your burn, and get really focused. What really happened, though, is we saw that those companies that could have real impact for customers immediately, meaning their use cases were high impact, relatively easy to deploy, meaning deployment in 4 to 6 or 8 weeks versus multiple quarters. We're actually seeing extensive demand in their products. This isn't across all companies, of course, but those that had correct impact or definitive impact for a consumer did actually quite well. From the investment side, we typically would sit down and meet with a portfolio company or an entrepreneur early in the conversation. We'll have multiple meetings, dinner meetings, lunch meetings, breakfast meetings, et cetera. Of course, we weren't doing that. And so we had to remodel to a non-physical meeting structure. But guess what? All our competing venture firms were doing that as well. And all of a sudden, Zoom-based funding took off and the competition was kicking in. And so actually we saw last year to be a very competitive year from deal making. Deal valuation was up at nearly every stage. Earlier stage was little less sanguine perhaps than later stage. But we're actually seeing this jump ball into earlier stage valuations happening. We now talk about mango seeds because seeds are no longer little seeds, they're big. And that sort of thesis is applied across each stage of the investment world. One other sort of sidebar, the SPAC market from an exit standpoint is actually pretty interesting. More than $75 billion worth of SPAC funding has occurred here in the last 5 or so months. If you contrast that to the $150 billion in venture capital, it's clearly a big number. And we don't expect that to slow down. We do, though, expect there'll be some blowups with SPACs. On the positive, SPAC does represent another exit potential model for a company that perhaps is less well suited for a public valuation or public exit. But in positive, it does allow that company to do forecasting of projected earnings, projected revenue in a way that a public IPO does not. So in theory, there's more data available. There are a number of quality companies that are being rolled into these blank check themes. Either way, for us, liquidity means more money comes back in to the venture world. Because as exits occur, that means those dollars become available to those limited partners who actually funded the funding in the beginning, and creates more appetite for more investment. So it's generally good. Just sort of breaking down some of the ways we look at markets. So, automation is one of these key trends, and I'm just sort of giving you how we sort of dissect markets. We look at sort of what are the key pillars that are occurring in the market, and automation is one of the top 3 topics that CIOs are telling us they're investing in. So we look at this from a structural standpoint. What are the drivers here from the pillar standpoint, and then look at the key sectors and specific companies within those sectors with an attempt to identify gaps or emerging trends that would then give us clarity of where and to whom to focus on from a investment standpoint. as early stage, sometimes we'll incubate companies. We'll work with teams like yourself to better understand where some of the new innovation is occurring that you are incubating, and try to learn from you early as a part of this gap analysis. And if we can guide you into one of these gaps that we're seeing, or work with you to share what we're seeing, perhaps there's a mutual win there. Another sector, just in security, same sort of thesis. Breakdown, looking at the key trends, and then identifying some areas of strategic investment from a market standpoint and gap standpoint. Another key thing that we're seeing is sort of the transition of the execution, specifically in the B2B world, on go-to-market strategy. So at the far right, we've been talking about, of course, for many years, the top-down model. Go meet with the CIO, win that endorsement. That executive then drives usage through the organization. That has quickly evolved through open source and freemium models to this product-led growth model, PLG, or bottoms-up selling, where an offering is made available to the doers, using the names here, versus the executives. And in doing so, early adoption and disruptive adoption can occur in large organizations that don't need the sort of approval mechanism to get in the building. So an individual developer or technician of some sort can download a product. You've built a way in which that product usage can be monitored. So product-led growth also has a fair amount of instrumentation into the product that allows that insertion to be captured by the vendor, where you can communicate in more of a concierge or supportive customer support sort of model to that individual user. Hey, here's some tricks, here's some communities to join, here's some best practices, here's what you should be doing next. Oh, see, you haven't logged in, let me show you how to log in. All those sort of triggers with tools like Intercom or Drift or Incent or others that are being used to support that. So PLG on one side, top down on another. And what we're realizing is that the bottoms-up model can run into a bit of a ceiling, whereby that developer, that user, that doer may not actually have any budget. So if in the end you actually want to monetize that offering, ultimately you need to break through some sort of ceiling here. And so this middle out strategy is the presumed superior model, whereby the manager, not the executive, is accessible through a very high-powered, high-impact use case. You develop a product that meets the manager's needs to have big impact, but mission-driven to solve a particular pain point quickly. So it's not a boil the ocean sort of effort. That insertion through the manager provides two forms of endorsement. One, that manager then drives usage through their team because they're the manager, and two, drives upsell to the senior executive for finance approval and budget, because they understand, the manager understands the process of getting budget approval in depth and wants and understands the needs really well. So that sort of middle out or sandwich based model is an alternative approach. All of these are plausible. There's different models for different products. Understanding go-to-market strategy as you build the product is perhaps the most mission critical thing to do early, and not a late sort of decision. Building into the product all the instrumentation and support, having all of the organization be part of the go-to-market thesis, not just the go-to-market team, is another key best practice in learning. So that whole customer journey is built into this strategy, as well as the product use cases itself. We spent a lot of time with CIOs, as I mentioned, and this last year has been sort of an amazing year. These are some of the groups or logos of some of the people that are part of it. It's made up of CIOs, CISOs, CTOs, and heads of corporate innovation and corporate venture teams. And they share with us all sorts of insight about what they're working on, and they also give feedback to our portfolio companies. And this past year was sort of this amazing year, and of course I sort of use this as this major tectonic shift that occurred And let me just share with you some of the things, and I spent an enormous amount of time in roundtable discussions and CIO dialogues at a constant level. And, the CIOs have long been sort of thrown under the bus, so to speak, as the house of no. They move too slowly. They're too focused on legacy. They don't drive innovation fast enough. The business units think they're just operators, not true value add, all these sorts of negative things. And many books have been written, the death of the CIO. What we saw this last year is that IT or technology really was the salvo for most companies to move from, let's say, 5% of their total employee staff working remotely to 95% of their employee staff working remotely, whether it was a large bank who had to move their entire customer support operation from these big call centers to all working from home over dining room tables, to, of course, healthcare, to higher education, to insurance companies, to, every company essentially moved to this work from home or remote work capability, and in a way that almost made it look too simple. The CIOs and their IT teams, were able to solve the get online and remote work almost in a few weeks, which you would arguably have said, hey, just think if you were the CEO of a company and you went down to your executive staff meeting, you said, okay, so we're launching this whole work from home thing, and we're going to move everybody to work from home as soon as possible. And you can only imagine, the head of HR, the head of finance, and everybody said, this is going to take us 2 years to do that. Well, of course, we didn't have 2 years. It had to move really fast. This is unleashed.
Gamiel,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. 1 second.
Please.
Do you mind if I ask a question? Because there's a line here that really stuck out for me, which was the third point under innovation: legacy versus new tech, major shift in focus and spend on new vendors and startups. Does that mean that within your CXO network, you had sort of a resounding viewpoint from these leaders that they were increasingly turning to new innovative sort of products and services that weren't available through their incumbents, and more apt to doing that? Is that what you're suggesting there?
It's exactly what I'm suggesting. And whether this is a temporary pain or transition of spend and prioritization or not, I don't know. But here's the example. Large company says, hey, we need to have an online collaboration set of tools available today or in the next few weeks. We called our team at SAP, we called our team at Oracle, we called our team at Microsoft. The reps and the support people all want Slack and Zoom. Get it up today. And what would have been a normal sort of, hey, we want to do vendor management and vendor decisions based upon our primary legacy relationships first, and go through that through a formal trial and process, POCs, became sort of a resiliency must-have now. What do most people want, and can we get it up and running? Sort of pragmatism. And those sort of analogies, and that one's maybe too simplistic, but those sort of analogies created, or those sort of scenarios rather, created a shift toward new technology as the easier to deploy, easier to maneuver into full deployment faster than our traditional legacy vendors could support.
Interesting. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that.
Yeah, no, please interrupt me. Any other questions? Because I'm sort of on a little diatribe here. So.
No, that's actually pretty perfect. And I think for the startups that were able to, or that innovation was able to break through into it, this could be a massive turning point, because all the same hurdles that they would have had to go through in terms of security compliance and other things, that sort of gets accelerated pretty quickly, which gives them a nice foothold into the enterprise.
Yeah,
great insight. Thank you for sharing.
I think it's interesting. I've been on this sort of new tech versus legacy conversation for a while, and I think really what we saw last year was sort of rocket fuel put into the conversation. I do think that for the last 10 years we've watched global teams, global IT organizations put up these innovation camps and innovation efforts. So the first point here around They've been doing sort of pretty hackathon events with showcases, and they write big checks and give away to people. And, I've been hearing that those are failing dramatically because they're not actually having real impact. So this pragmatism of impact is sort of, I think, an interesting thing that's driving some of this new tech to be driven as well. So you get large projects with large vendors. Okay, we're in our 16th month of this large SAP deployment, and we still are not changing productivity. Meanwhile, we brought up this new Twilio tool for supporting and tracking payments, and it's having immediate impact. Sort of like, okay, so why are we spending in the wrong direction here? So this sort of pragmatism, I think, is interesting. Speed we're seeing as something happening. Risk tolerance is an interesting thesis, and the point that I'm trying to make here is this is more of a management problem, and risk tolerance has always been sort of this, fail fast, fail quickly, accept failure. That's what startups do really well. We need to be better at that. Yeah, great. Hey, we don't pay for failure. Was the pushback, and I still have to meet my objectives, blah blah blah. But what happened this past year was, as everybody was forced into this COVID work environment, there was a do the best you can sort of thesis applied, and that supported a new level of tolerance, I guess, for failure or for things not having to be perfect. This iterative deployment model. And what CIOs are talking about is a move from project-based deployments to product-based deployments. And this idea in a product is there's iterative milestones that have to occur just like a project, but more impactful as a product release would occur versus, hey, on the following date, we're releasing this. We're releasing this, and we're iteratively gauging whether or not it met the goals. Otherwise, we're returning back. So this constant sort of product loop is very different than the big bang sort of launch model. And in doing so, there's a lot of learning happening in that. So more, I don't know if that all makes sense, but more of this PLG or product market fit sort of agenda versus traditional waterfall approach. And this is the way that CIOs really gain acceptance in their organization around impact to their teams and impact to the businesses they work from. Budgets are interestingly not as bad as we initially thought, meaning CIOs are saying they actually expect budgets to increase or flat versus lower. We expected more, would say lower. And so arguably IT is at the center of solving things. These are the three priorities. They leaned in to tell us we're the top, cloud and digital transformation, cybersecurity, and automation. These are the next 7. Everything from data analytics and AI and ML, of course, to edge computing. And let me know if you have any questions on this. You could see the whole report on our website. So if you go to the Mayfield website, CXO of the Future, I've got all these reports available to you if you want. Digitization, clearly, the drive. Everything must be digitized. And again, COVID, I think it accelerated some of that. So I'll stop with that. Any questions on sort of the CIO input or things there?
Just a quick one again for me, Gamiel. Yeah. Sorry to take too much time here, but the 5G pillar was really interesting of the 7 pillars. I haven't read the report. I've seen it. I haven't read it yet, but is it safe to assume that the CXOs are looking at that in the context of private 5G networks and 5G enabled technologies as well, or is there a pointed point around that priority?
Yeah, I think the most evolved actually have explicit use cases that are driving need for additional bandwidth for very specific applications, and it often comes with edge computing and new application environments that demand higher low latency support. That's not across every industry, though. So if you were to talk to Bank of America about their 5,000 branches, they're looking for a transformative way to lower the cost of their current legacy infrastructure. So their first move is, to a full SASE or software-defined architecture, doing that at scale, application-aware, cybersecurity, and then how do we reduce with a private 5G network, perhaps our spend, our resources, and automation to support those environments for even more advanced use cases. So it's sort of this journey, I think. So it represents something that I must have on my roadmap. Some more urgent than others. It seems like it's more exploratory than full deployment, though.
That's good to know. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry to interrupt again.
Here to be interrupted. So, all right. So I spent a lot of time with our portfolio companies on this product market fit problem statement, which is, and this is sort of me sharing a little bit of laundry here, but sometimes an entrepreneur who eagerly wants to change the world has built this beautiful product, and through our connections and their connections, they've been introduced to some early adopters. Those early adopters could be friends in some way, meaning some connection that is very supportive of their success and are willing and perhaps eager to take advantage of this new offering. And then the entrepreneur says, yes, we've absolutely reached precise product market fit. We know who our customer type is, we know what our ideal customer profile is, and we're now ready to scale, and we'd like to raise our next big round of financing. And then they do that, and they begin to hire extensive go-to-market sales resources, marketing teams, et cetera. And all of a sudden, there's a slowdown in market demand. And we also then begin to see a level of churn. Customers aren't renewing. Some of those early adopters aren't quite as referenceable as they once were. There's a little less sort of aggressiveness, visceral or organic aggressiveness to pursue expansion of the product. Well, what the heck happened? I thought we were all celebrating that we had reached this product market fit milestone. The truth is, the entrepreneur and the team perhaps had a bit of happy ears on. They felt that their beautiful puppy, this beautiful product they had developed, had indeed reached product market fit, but really weren't asking the hard questions. And the hard questions are for people we don't know, for customers who are currently using, will they buy more? Will they recommend? Is it really having direct and hard impact or specific impact on that business from a valuation standpoint? And would they, without support from you, continue to pursue more product? And all those things, I mean, there's a whole number of questions and quandaries you need to get into around realizing true product market fit, but really being very aware and very honest around product market fit is really the quandary to get into before, and don't do this prematurely, is really the long point. So, it's really about prioritization of your use cases. And, we talk about a lot of our portfolio companies can sometimes get into this overconsumption of ideas and overconsumption of use cases. And we then say that the power of focus is really what's going to help you here. So really minimize what you're going to focus on and really focus the whole team on that and determine what you're not going to do. And having a long not list or a markets that you're not going to pursue is a great way of focusing, of course. And all of this makes sense, but look seriously at what's on your plate. What are you building? How has it been validated? How has it been validated at scale? And is there a supportive journey for the customer, not for you, but for the customer, to move from an initial use case that has impact, that would turn them into advocates, both internally and maybe externally, to drive more demand and to drive demand that's going to have impact on their lives. So it's really sort of this empathetic or sympathetic listening to your customer's priorities, and really understanding that ideal customer profile. And I like to do this sort of persona mapping of your ICP, where you know the person by name, you know who they report to, you know what keeps them up at night, you know how they will improve upon their own value to their organization, you know what matters, and how that all works. You can, in fact, finish sentences for them. You're so deep into their dialogue. And maybe you can afford to do that with a few, not with everyone. So who are you going to do that with first, is sort of this power of focus thing. So PMF, ICP. And this sort of empathetic design, you know, we can sometimes over-engineer and over-design, and really create sort of the perfect product. But is that really the use case? Is that really the elegant use case that is going to have that immediate or direct impact for the customer? That could be a simpler starting point that could actually turn more users on versus fewer users on. Anyway, so just a lens to look at it. And then just sort of repeating, and I'm bringing up Dave McJanet here as the CEO of HashiCorp, which is one of our companies who have built a very successful bottom-up, community-driven platform. And he's a really strong believer that had to be done early in the process. It wasn't this afterthought. It had to be communicated both to the engineering team, kind of how are we building into the product, our journey, that understands both how the customer will download, begin to use, break down their needs and assessments of the product into a use case that has immediate sort of impact, and then the role that sales and marketing and the rest of the organization needs to have in supporting that journey. So a comprehensive product-led customer journey where everybody has a seat at the table and everybody owns a piece of the puzzle in solving to that. And again, you can't build that too late, is Dave McJanet's point. And lots of points about, you know, creating the hook and then the upsell that builds off of that, and really creating efficiency in that model. And you know that this hook is this MVP that really solves that burning pain point. It's so simple to begin. It's simple to communicate. It has immediacy in clarity for that user, and ideally, it has a large surface area of users, meaning it will impact many people across the organization versus just a single individual. Even though that single individual may be the ICP, the results of that initial burning pain point will be visible from an impact to more broadly across the organization. And then from there, you've earned the right to move to an upsell model. And ideally, the upsell is encouraged through a catalyst of a community, where the community of users inside the building, so to speak, become spokespeople, salespeople that influence more users, more usage, and more understanding as to the direct value of this in this offering.
Hey, Gamiel.
Yeah.
Since you said that you don't mind interruptions, I'm going to jump in with one.
Please,
okay.
Yeah.
My name is Kevin Bandy. I represent a company by the name of Symmetric. And I very much reflect what you're talking about with the penetrate in the middle, because I find that, just speaking for us, that's where we're penetrating. When we rebranded ourselves in COVID, we knew that we had to have immediate relevance, but also be a path by which we define the exit from COVID. And I think that changes a lot of buying behaviors. But something I wanted to clarify is, when I looked at your previous slide, I think you had Edge, you had ML, you had 5G, you had application, customer engagement. So each of those, I think it was six of your 10, we have direct relevance to. But my question of you is, when I need to go read your report like Jim as well, I don't see less budget, but I see budget being reallocated considerably coming out of COVID. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, because CIOs tend to look at your 1 through 10 as individual technologies. Yep. Business leaders don't look at them as individual technologies. They look at them as an enabler. And yes. I'm curious. I think that's where we're seeing some of our penetrate in the middle. CIOs tend to think myopically about an individual technology, where the business leaders are looking more at the implications. And I'm just curious if you're seeing a trend and shift in that as well, because to me, what I'm seeing, that's why there is more dynamic control of budgets, is those business leaders want to be far more agile to use the collective value of their whole budget, not just pieces for individual technologies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're pointing to one of the long-standing issues as to why CIOs have struggled. They can sometimes too narrowly be technology focused versus business impact focused. And what you just described to me is a scenario by which your selling perhaps needs to be through the advocacy of the business user, who doesn't need to understand the individual components, but more so the outcome of the business solution, and advocate to whoever owns the budget, and in this case the budget owner is IT, that they drive it to IT based upon the needs of the business, and that you then have a selling motion that helps to uncover not the technology issues, but the business impact results in what time frame, with clarity, sort of the traditional ROI based selling model, that then says, and here's the chief concerns that your CIO will have and how we can checklist those. And in some ways putting that sort of challenger sales model on the shoulders of IT leadership. Then of course you befriend IT leadership to say, and here's how we enable you, your team, et cetera, to operationalize this at scale. So that's a fairly traditional model of getting business unit to be the advocate to drive a larger scale solution.
Yeah, and you went where one of the biggest trends that we're seeing, which is where companies weren't able to actually do true chargeback across BUs to look at performance, to look at adoption, to look at migration towards business models. I'm seeing an enormous amount of CFO requirement to look at true deployment by BU, because they're looking at a faster return on any investment today.
Yeah. This slide, I don't know if this helps this, but part of the problem we see is piercing the noise. So a startup with no recognition inside the building, no awareness to generally the broader organization, can have some difficulty in piercing the noise and getting on the radar. And whether it's executive radar or not, the idea of getting on the radar to have the sort of support that you need to actually move into a true customer discovery and customer journey effort. And the idea is you've got to be in the top painkiller area. So I think this point you make about budgets being reallocated, you need to be able to focus on the key areas of the reallocation. So what are those areas? How do you map to that? How do you map to what they currently have? So this integrate to their current ecosystem. And all of this is motherhood and apple pie, I suppose. So you've heard all this before, but constantly rationalizing the clarity with which you are at the top of the heap, at the top of the priority list, is how to stay current, or how to stay within focus for your advocate buyer. So.
Yeah, and then I'll hush, but I think there has always been technical merit but today there is measured business merit that people are looking for with every piece of technology. And Jim and Carl and Kurt have heard me say this many times, is I think the business leaders are driving the digitization agenda, whereas the CIOs are in implementation anymore.
One of the CIOs that I spent some time with shared sort of a process that he likes to use to help rationalize spend. And he says he'll meet with the startup based upon recommendation from us at Mayfield or someone else, one of his peer group or something. So there is an endorsement of sorts that gets them on his radar. He says, but then he challenges that company to come back with a high impact message. And he does so in a way that's very formulaic for him to make a decision. And once he makes a decision, he's full in. And this is somewhat idealistic, but so this was the CIO of Equinix, and he did a number of major projects. He ultimately became the COO of the company. He's now since retired. And Brian Lilly is his name, really smart guy. Anyway, he said he'd meet with you and he'd say, great, so you're here in my office because of this endorsement. I love your technology, at least at a high level, but frankly, I don't understand if it will have impact or if it fits. And I'm going to give you that as the to-do. I'm going to give you access to a resource here at Equinix who will help uncover information that you might need. And then I'm going to give you 4 weeks to come back and blow me away. You've got to be able to tell me that your technology, well, one, that you've assessed our current landscape, our current environment, and you've been able to uncover some very specific, meaningful, quantitative, not qualitative, quantitative gaps. And you then present that your solution solves to those gaps, but again, not with qualitative only, but with very quantitative impact with timing. And then finally, you tell me, as part of this thesis that you're going to present to me, you tell me what the beginning looks like and the stages of adopting with impact at a people and process level, so that I know that you know my ecosystem well enough. Now, that's a heavy order, but if you can do that, you have my full endorsement. And I know that's a tall order to do, but it's a narrative, or it's a process, or a rubric rather, that I think is part and parcel to this high impact selling. That is not, hey, I have a new cool tool, can I demo it for you? But rather, hey, I understand your pain. I understand how to reorganize with our technology that pain into a better outcome. And let me confirm that I understand your problems. Let me confirm that I understand your current ecosystem. And with that, let me offer very specific evidence of how it would impact you. So this high impact selling model is a differentiated strategy.
Yeah, and I'll leave it with just this. And Jim, I apologize. You said go for it when I raised my hand, so I apologize to everybody. So I think what you just said is the summation of what I mean when there's always technical merit, but now there's business merit. It's no longer qualitative. It's measured against the current install base to understand what the beginning of the journey is going to, how it's going to be optimized, and how it will be measured along every aspect of the implementation. So I think what you just summarized is a great focal point of where we all have to penetrate any enterprise or any small medium business going forward.
So one of the things is how to present your story really well. I spent a lot of time on sort of this rubric of telling your story, building your value proposition in a clear way, defining your target use case and the journey of what customer success looks like, and then ultimately using all of that to build rapport with your prospective customer. I talk about something I call the story arc. That starts with you defining the problem, your answer, your innovation to that problem, the customer journey, meaning definitive impact areas, and then finally how to begin, and using a demo as evidence is to sort of illustrate the beginning part. This is an overly simplistic story arc, but essentially a simple model that I call PAIN: problem, answer, impact, next step, as a rubric for simply defining your story in a way that's tangible, specific, drives urgency, drives impact, and a call to action for how to begin. Lots of presentations that we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen them as well. Overly busy slides, overly complicated. We do professional presentation training to our portfolio companies. I've got a team that comes in and puts the entrepreneurs on tape, and we role play the tape back and forth over multiple hours in a 3-part presentation process. And we've seen some of the worst slides in the world, as I'm sure you can imagine, that don't tell the story, that are too messy, that come across as overly technical, that aren't focused on me, the customer. And that's largely the problem that most presentations have and most presenters have. They're either not good presenters, and so they're up on stage a little bit scared to present, and they're not quite listening. They're more just getting through their slides, or they're overly complicated and really focus more on the technology and less on the impact. And so there's some simple rubrics of how to do this, and again, I'll share all these slides later. The other part is really having a really clear customer journey. So a great meeting, how do we begin? What's next step? Who's the individual engaged? What will that impact look like and what point in time? And then where do we go from there? And we don't want to boil the whole ocean in the beginning. We just want to determine if there's a way to begin that can have impact before we make any bigger decisions. So it's the crawl, walk, run, and definitive number-driven impact in the whole thing. I've asked all these CIOs to tell us what doesn't work, or how best to work, and I'll just pop through some of these. And again, I'll share with you all these slides after, but these are sort of I asked them to say, dear founder, please do the following. First, understand my business. And I'll just pop through these here really quickly. So many times I'll say that the entrepreneur, so eager to get the meeting, it's as though they're focused on scheduling the meeting, less about me. And more importantly, did they spend time really understanding and researching in depth our current environment, and understand how they go about things? And there's all sorts of stuff you can get about other vendors they're working with, collaborative approaches they've done to driving innovation. So do your homework, of course. And then, just don't tell me that you've got a great product, but tell me what that starting point is, that MVP, and then where this goes, so that I can sort of begin to partition, where is this long term? Is this something that is a tool, or is this a platform thesis? And what do I need to consume to get into it? And again, just don't focus on the technology, resolve their problems, and talk about it in ways that can be a narrative that they would appreciate. So bring that ideal customer profile narrative into it. Hey, we work with people like Susan and Mark. They're typically the security operations lead. They typically have this sort of problem, and they then report to. So get into the narrative of a real life example, and then offer a very narrow starting point. And how do you then move this to operationalizing? How do you help them learn this new technology? What are the skill sets they're going to need? What would ideal look like? And again, a narrative here can help a lot. And don't underestimate the problems that a large company has. They're thinking scale, and you're thinking entry point. They're thinking global deployment, and you're thinking first win. Get on the same page with what enterprise class requirements are going to be, and how important they will be to them before they can actually truly endorse your technology. Make it really easy to work with. You need to be the simplest. You need to help them through the process. You need to offer a process and a rubric and a team and a descriptive model. And so, somebody was saying the other day, what if you could just create a simple sandbox that was outside of their firewall where they could customer test drive with maybe some prototype data. Boy, that would make that whole access, infrastructure, security clearance and whatnot available. It's a brilliant move. Set up an Amazon or Azure-based sandbox that can be a real-life test with definitive and prescriptive outcome that will allow them to make a decision in a way that's quick and seamless for them. You being appreciative of their problem. Yes, sorry.
Hi, Gamiel. This is Ketki. I'm one of the founders for A5G Networks, that is autonomous 5G networks. And thanks for sharing all these insights, very helpful. So I have a question on the timeline. So you mentioned that there are different priorities, and 5G is one of the priorities for the enterprises. And what we are seeing is banks is definitely like someone who are trying to enable the private networks in the banks, mostly because of the privacy reasons. And so as an early stage startup, how do we work on the timelines? Because most of the enterprises are trying to solve more immediate problems. Should early stage startups especially, focus on more strategic problems that they would solve?
Yeah, ultimately you need to align to strategic initiatives, but you've got to have that start narrow, initial high impact use case. You've got to have something that gives you a reason to take their time, that fits an immediate high need pain. And ideally that then is a stepping stone to the more strategic initiative that gives them reason to endorse you for the long term. But if you can't nail that initial, then you're not worth spending time with.
Okay, thanks.
The value proposition at a financial level, people hate to get into this ROI sort of conversation. They feel like they don't know the numbers well. Know them well. Know how their business operates. Know how they calculate. Use it as a challenger conversation to better understand how they'll prioritize numbers. So don't be either unaware or afraid of proof of value and specifics in proof of value. Be willing to be challenged on it, but have a point of view. And some people are concerned that they're not sure how exactly you support them from a selling standpoint. Walk through what that looks like. What if they have a preferred model to work with an outside channel or a system integrator? How will you work with them? How will you support us long term? Doesn't need to be overly consumed on this topic, but understand their buying and your strategy to support their buying model and preference. And then the last is really using your referenceable customers, early adopters, not just to open new doors, but as a customer advocacy group. You can increase your largesse, your message, your understanding by having your own network. So don't underestimate, particularly at this stage of your building of the company right now, an advocacy group, a network of advisors who represent your ideal customer profile. They don't need to be customers in all cases, but they need to represent the voice of your customer so that you're aligned to and in step with the needs of broadly your market, and you're investing real time to not just listen to your own PowerPoint presentation and your own technology message, but through the lens of your prospective customer and how they think. And cast this out on your website as a resource, as a strategic resource. Speak with them, hold roundtable discussions that drive their leadership as part and parcel to how you're designing, how you're helping, reach value proposition in the marketplace, et cetera. So I'm a huge believer in extending your message this way. Lots of stuff on our website. Happy to stay engaged and do all kinds of sort of shared ideas. But there's lots of stuff on our website that you can take a look at. So why don't I stop? I don't know if I overstepped on time.
Not at all. Not at all. This is it's been brilliant. I see the deck has changed since the last time we had you on, Gamiel. So if you're still open to sharing it with that,
sure.
I'd love to be able to share it with the teams.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Great. Guys, before we wrap off, is there any other last questions we'd like to ask Gamiel? Or conversely, Gamiel, if someone wanted to reach out and ask a question directly, are you open to that?
Sure, of course.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to respect your time. I know how busy you are with other things. So with that, thank you so much for your time today and for spending it with us and our teams. We really, really appreciate it.